Hey guys, welcome back to another Honkai Star Rail video, and today we are going to be doing a tier list for all of the characters present from the start of the version to version 2.2. Now you may notice that there are that Firefly and Jade are here, which are scheduled to be released in 2.3, and while I will be releasing this video in 2.2, if you would like I can put them here for a moment just to say that I will be adding my thoughts and ratings on them I don't want to say posthumously because that refers to someone who just died. I'll be adding them after the patch comes out, so if you're watching this a few weeks or months into the future, then just feel free to refer to the description for what I will be putting in for these two. And as a footnote, I will be releasing this video before Boothill comes out, so this will be covering version 2.2, but this will be out before Boothill, which means I'm technically not allowed to talk about him without divulging leaks. So we'll be leaving it here as well. So these three units, if you want to know more about them, they'll be in the description. As for the rest of the squad, here are my tiers for today. We have top tier, highest pull values in the game, which I'll be talking about in a moment, and then you have excellent. If you have them, build them. These two tiers are pretty much the same, it's just that, you know, this tier above inches out a little bit more in terms of necessity, or in terms of like if you have to choose which units to prioritize, then you want to go for them. Then you have pure fiction or bust. Some units are extremely valuable in one game mode and pretty much useless outside of that. That does not mean they're bad units by any means, you still do need them because pure fiction is a very integral part of Star Rail's endgame. Then you have decent, which are very respectable, very solid units, you cannot go wrong with them and you should go out of your way to build them, but only if you're done with all the other, essential characters, and or if you have a preference for them, you can build them too. Units in this tier are more than worth investing into, and they'll take you relatively far, just not as much as these two tiers. Then you have niche. I put at the bottom half of the tier list, and I kind of don't want to give the wrong impression that niche units are bad. It's just that like if I can make them a gray tier, then I would, but I do like having a kind of a rainbow spectrum for my tiers. So niche units are situational and or team dependent. That does not necessarily mean they're good or bad, they just have a spot that they could function in, whether or not that circumstance is of high value or low value. So some units in here might be very good in niche categories, and other units might be in niche categories but are not the best. Then you have average, units who are usable with significant investment, or if you're like a brand new account, you're just starting out and you have nothing else, then you can use them. Overall, they have relatively lower pull values, and you shouldn't put too much into them unless once again you have a preference for them. And then finally subpar, you have the lowest pull value outperformed by too many units. It's not that they're unusable, you could still use them. It's just if you look at it from a practical or economical standpoint, it's not exactly the best investment to make. Now, I should clarify that Star Rail is very, I suppose, time dependent in the sense that depending on what buffs or what kind of, I forget what it's called. I think it's the memory turbulence or whatever, whatever buff or theme is running for that specific pure fiction and memory of chaos, that can cause certain units to skyrocket in value for a temporary period of time. And then you have multiple endgame modes. You have Memory of Chaos, and then you have Pure Fiction. You have the new endgame mode that's coming out that's supposed to incentivize hunt units, and then you also have Golden Gears, which I know not many people like to count as endgame since a lot more emphasis is placed on the blessings and curios that you get as opposed to the actual character strength, but it is still worth considering in my opinion. Naturally, depending on what kind of turbulence or cycle you're on, some characters might function better, especially in one or two game modes, not all three. So the point of this tier list is to be used as a general reference point. That being said, like any tier list video, it is ultimately my opinion. If it's convenient, you can use it as a reference point, but do your best to cross-reference this with a lot of other tier lists or whatever sources of information you have. That being said, I'd like to think I'm fairly informed about every character, and I don't think my placements will be too offensive. But being a tier list video, someone's bound to get upset. Anyways, without further ado, let's begin. Kicking things off with Asta, we have her in niche. Asta is mostly known for her speed boosting capability. Her ultimate can be universally applicable depending on what you're going for, and she can increase fire damage and has a burn attached to her kit. Despite her ultimate being beneficial for a wide variety of teams, it's ironically used for very niche purposes for, let's say, turn manipulation and whatnot. So it can be good for speedrunning, especially if you field her in place of sustain. If you're going a full DPS comp, then she could be a decent choice for a Memory of Chaos and to a lesser extent Pure Fiction, but overall I think she's definitely a more niche unit and kind of got power crept a bit with the release of the new support, which I'll talk about later on in the video. Herda, she is Pure Fiction or Bust. Arguably the best Pure Fiction unit in the game in terms of investment and usability, with the sole caveat that she's virtually unusable outside of it. Thanks to Pure Fiction, she has a very valuable niche to fulfill, and I think she will continue to be useful because her kit is just explicitly designed for pure fiction. Essentially, every player should invest in her, but she's only going to be used for PF, nothing else. Then again, like I said, PF is a very integral part of Star Wars endgame. Next character is going to be Bronya. Bronya will be the first top tier character. Competition for Harmony supports has gone up with Runmei and Sparkle, and then of course Robin, but she's still by far one of the best supports in the game, and definitively the best 5-star, so I think everyone would agree that if you don't have her already, your choice for the 300 pulse guaranteed 5-star standard unit should definitely be her. She has turn advance, she has a team-wide buff, she's a good hypercarry support, but she can also still buff general teams. I think the one team that she doesn't really work too well with is damage over time, but outside of that, you really can't go wrong with her. Seela will be, okay, this could be a hot take. I'm gonna put her in decent. A number of you may have seen recently my What Happened to Seela video, and while I do think she's still more than usable, and I think she's still definitely a viable choice for endgame, I do believe that she was knocked down a peg. Again, decent does not mean they're bad. People have this idea that being not the best character means you're the worst character, but Seela's still a very good character. She's stuck in a weird limbo where she's not really a dedicated single target unit, even though yes, she has the second highest single target DPS in the game behind Ratio, but a reset mechanic by itself does not make her as good at clearing compared to standard erudition units. Good damage and is easy to understand and get the hang of, and she does pair well with any turn advance supports like Bronya, Sparkle, and Robin. So she's still a very good character to have, I just don't think she's someone you want to prioritize going after, especially if you have more of the excellence. Like I said, if you have her and no one else, then definitely build her. But if you do have other DPS characters, then maybe you might want to go for them first and then work on Seela later. That being said, Jade's a quantum erudition unit, so she might shake things up a bit. Serval's going to be average. A decent choice in pure fiction, but she's built more for sustained fights, not clearing, in the sense that Herda is. She does have a low cost ultimate, which is nice, and she can deal damage over time, but she also does need to build crits, so she's kind of all over the place. Despite getting better with Eidolons, especially at E6, she's one of the more replaceable characters in the game. We have plenty of other lightning units who are much stronger than her. I think she's not a bad choice to have in the early to mid game, but if you have other lightning units, you should definitely go after them first. Next character is Japard. Japard is decent. He kinda got power crept by Aventurine. I say kind of, he very much got power crept by Aventurine, but if you don't have Aventurine, he's really the only big AoE shielder in the game. He can apply freeze, which is good for debuff oriented teams, so if you want to pair him with Acheron, that's not a bad choice. However, he would be higher if he had some more utility, but overall he has one job and does that job very well. Until more AoE shielders come into the mix, because right now we actually don't have a 4-star AoE shielder, he's arguably, in my opinion, the second best candidate for your 300 pulse free selector, if you already have Bronya. Next one is Natasha. Natasha's average. Early game healer, she's sufficient for early to mid game, not so much late to end game, and she gets outclassed by virtually every other sustain in the game. So use her in the early game to get yourself through the initial stages of progression, but then once you get any other sustain unit, you can replace her. Pela is an excellent character. Pela has definitely matured in value over time. People are beginning to realize just how important AoE defense break is, and with the release of Acheron, that's only gotten more and more necessitated. She is one of the best 4-stars in the game. An AoE 40% defense break that has almost 100% uptime is pretty disgusting, and she's also SP positive in that you don't have to use her skill most of the time. An AoE-centric unit, she can be useful in single target. The one downside with her is that she has a lot of useless DPS elements in her kit that no one really cares about. She's a support. Otherwise, I would wager she's the second best 4-star character in the game. Clara's gonna be indecent. She has a strange niche of counter-tanking that's better for AoE scenarios if all enemies target her. She has the potential to do a lot of damage while tanking for the team, and is overall a good bruiser that works in single target and AoE. Not the best by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly not the worst. She can also be a decent choice in certain modes in pure fiction because she has an AoE skill. I'm willing to bet that with the release of Boonhill, Clara might get a little bit worse, but for now, she's a pretty good unit. This character is Sampo. Kill yourself. No, I'm kidding. On a more serious note, he's a facilitator of damage over time and is reserved only for dot teams. And he does have good break pressure, and his damage over time is quite powerful. It's just that he's strictly meant for damage over time. That's it. So he's the definition of niche. Then we have Physical Trailblazer. Bad. As highlighted in my Why No One Plays Physical Trailblazer video, they're a jack of all trades, master of none. They tried to do too many things while not even coming close to excelling in any of them. and they get beaten out by just about every other DPS unit for the simple fact that they're just a very bland character. They don't do anything noteworthy that enables them to stand out. So as soon as you get a new damage dealer, no matter what element it is, basically just replace them. Next character is Hook. I'm gonna also put her in bad. I initially actually had her in average, but from my personal experience and just my observations of the early days of Starl, I don't see anyone who actually went out of their way to build her. I do see some people who went for, Serval or Natasha. A lot of people actually use Natasha in the early game, but no one really used Hook. So I just feel like there's no reason to put her in average if I've never seen anyone talk about her that much. But in any case, Hook's a fake destruction character, more like a hunt unit. She gets beaten out by a lot of fire units in almost every field, and while she does have a dot which can help her in niche damage over time teams, all in all she's below average at everything. I think that she's one of the more forgettable units in the game, and that's reflected in her gameplay too. Locha is going to be excellent. His sustain's overkill, which kind of hard caps his max potential. You can learn more about that in my healers vs shielder video where I talk about how Locha, and by extension most of the healing units, their sustain is wasted by the fact that most characters don't have enough HP to actually make a full use of it. All the same, he's a very brainless healer, which is good for autoplay and is SP efficient / positive depending on how optimal you want to use him. One thing that makes his excellent status somewhat tenuous is that he's highly susceptible to power and feature creep. As more sustained units come out with more utility than him who can do more things than just healing, case in point Huohuo, he will fall off. I did put him in excellent. In terms of usability, I might not say he's excellent if we go by the need to pull for him. And pull value is important to talk about in Starl, considering there's so much need for team building and different types of compositions. So if you already have Locha, then keep using him and build him if you haven't yet. But newer players, I would personally hold out for another 5-star healer or Huohuo. One last thing to note is that he is tied with Huohuo in terms of healing only, so he's just as competent as she is in that field, but he does get beaten out by Huohuo in min-maxing and other circumstances that require more cleansing. Next character is going to be Jingyuan. Jingyuan would have been indecent, but I think given how much he's gotten buffed indirectly via a ton of new supports like Sparkle and Renmei, I understand to some extent that also applies to other damage characters like Seela, but I do think that Jingyuan got buffed a ton. Also due to the fact that he's pretty good in pure fiction. Not Himiko and Herta level, but still very usable. He's an erudition unit that doesn't suffer too much in single target because of the way Lightning Lord's single target blast works, and he takes a little more effort to optimize, but he can definitely compete with the best DPSs in the game. Plus, that alone makes him like one extra tier higher. Next character is Yanqing. Yanqing is going to be average. I would have put him here, but yes, the Venturing did technically indirectly buff Yanqing because now everyone has access, or rather had access, to a support who could facilitate Yanqing's playstyle. Even so, his condition of never taking damage of any kind is still very restrictive, and he's purely single target. There's no semblance of AoE in his kit whatsoever. Like I mentioned, Aventurine helps out a bit with consistent shielding, but that doesn't really do anything to alleviate the underlying point that Jingliu is a strict upgrade to Yanqing in every possible scenario. So Yanqing mains, if any of you even exist, you can celebrate the release of a proper tank for him. Not that Japard wasn't bad in his job, it's just that now we have a better tank. Everyone else, he's practically the Chi-Chi of Honkai Starl. Bailu is decent. She's damage mitigation, she heals a ton, albeit somewhat randomly, and she does have a revive in her base kit, which no other healer to my knowledge has. One more thing is that she does have built-in burst protection by healing after every hit, so she somewhat circumvents the main foundational weakness of healers being that they can't heal you if your team is dead. What does hurt her placement is that she has no cleanse, and cleansing is paramount to endgame content. There's so many instances where if you get affected by any kind of debuff or any kind of crowd control, you're basically screwed if you have no cleanse. So you can use Bailu if you have some other way to cleanse your team, like let's say Bronya. Outside of that, she's a pure healer, she does nothing else. Tingyun is the next top tier character. She's the best 4-star in the game, and it's not even close. Great attack buff and is SP efficient / positive. She's one of the few characters in the game who can battery, making her good for hyper carries who need to rely on their ultimate for uptime and damage, and she also provides a big damage boost on top of that. For some reason, and I can't surmise why, Tingyun gets attacked a lot. I don't know what it is. It's like she taunts enemies despite not having one, which isn't a bad thing considering you can build HP and stuff on her if you want, but that's something I couldn't help but notice. Why does she get attacked so often? I digress though. If I were to pick a downside to her, it's that she cannot support double carry teams like Kaka Swan, even though Tina's repertoire would be very nice to have for them. Then again, most teams have only one carry anyway, so it's not too big of a con for her, and like I said, she's a 4-star character. The power that she brings in relation to her rarity is on par with Bennett and Xingqiu from Genshin. That's the best way I can describe her. She's the Bennett of Starl. Qingque, I'm going to make her a custom tier for her. One moment. Alright, we're gonna put her here. So she's gonna be up here. Yeah, let's just leave her there. I think nice and comfortable up there. If I were to be serious with her though, Qingque can reach blast damage on par with the best, but takes luck and investment and no shortage of resets to do so. So she's a good investment, particularly because she's a 4-star, if you consent to malding endlessly with her. I'm pretty sure she's the strongest 4-star damage dealer in practice. Shui maybe could beat her out, but Shui is even more maldy than Qingque. If I were to not put her in a meme tier, I would say she's probably here, maybe, somewhere around here, but for the time being she'll be up here. This character is going to be Sushang. Sushang is average. She's a very unremarkable character, which is kind of intentional because she gives off that vibe in the story where she's just your average, garden variety fighter, so to speak. She does have decent single target damage, but is overall just outscaled by a lot of other characters, whether physical or not. To her credit, she is SP neutral with E1 and is a good early to mid game investment, so if you get her early, then consider using her. Outside of that though, for late 10 game, you're more likely than not gonna bench her. Fire Trailblazer. Fire Trailblazer will be in niche. Fire Trailblazer is the definition of a niche tank. They're an aggro counter tank, which means they're not applicable for every combat scenario, but they do excel in the scenarios that they can be used in. In a very similar fashion to Pela, they did receive a significant indirect buff with the release of Acheron, since Taunt does count as a debuff, which makes them possibly outperform other tanks in this department, since no other tank besides Japard has a debuff like that. Despite that though, I do think that Fire Trailblazer is generally worse than shield or cover tanks, but they do have a use because they can also do a fair bit of damage. That kind of doesn't really matter anymore because Aventurine can do even more damage, but once again, Aventurine doesn't have a debuff. Fire Trailblazer could get better over time, which they have already, like I said with the release of Acheron, but I do still think they're niche. They're not quite good enough to be in the decent category or higher. Yukong. Yukong is average. She can give hella buffs, on par with the best Harmony characters even in non-imaginary teams. The one difference between her and units like Sparkle, Runmei, and Robin is consistency. She has major issues with uptime, that it's almost too impractical to use her because it's so difficult to maintain her massive amount of buffs. So she gives a lot, but trying to reach that point becomes almost counterproductive. March is going to be in bad. I might say average. I'm just gonna leave her here for now though. A very solid jack of all trades support in the early game, but got power crept insanely hard in almost every field except AoE freeze, which means that you can use her for, remembrance cheesing and stuff like that in, let's say, Golden Gears and whatnot. But yeah, I just feel like, I don't know, maybe I'll put her here or here. I just think that March is, like other free tutorial characters, meant to just get you through the early game and then you replace them as soon as possible. So maybe I'm too harsh by putting her in subpar, because she did have a use and still to some extent has a use right now. So I might put her here actually. I'm not sure actually. I'll just leave her here for the time being just to not piss off the March fans, but I just think that nowadays there are so many better support options out there. Dan Heng on the other hand will be bad. He's fast, he can do good single target damage, but just like Sushang and Hook, he got power crept pretty hard by other DPS characters. For a 4-star character, his DPS scaling is actually not half bad, but that's the problem with him. He's a 4-star DPS character. Unless you have any absurd mechanic like Qingque, you're not going to be able to compete with the current meta. It's a turn-based game. It's numbers. It's all about numbers. In Genshin, maybe you could cheat with playstyle or other kinds of interactions, but in Starl, it's all about numbers. Also, lest you forget, there's a 5-star version of him. They're not the same function, much less the same element, but still. For people who like Dan Heng as a character, just get the 5-star version of him. So you can't even pull the waifu over meta card for Dan Heng because there's a better, sexier version of him. Himeko. Himeko is going to be in Pure Fiction or Bust. Almost obligatory to build if you have her, but only for Pure Fiction. She's one of the best at wave clearing thanks to her talent and ultimate. She could have some use outside of PF, but you should just keep her in PF. She's another one of those top tier in Pure Fiction and kind of trash everywhere else. For the umpteenth time though, If you're good in pure fiction, that carries a lot of equity in the current meta. Welt is going to be decent. He's a very unique support who can debuff and attack pretty well. He actually does quite a bit of damage, and technically works for a lot of situations, but can struggle to find a reason to be used over top tier supports, barring select niches as a backup dancer, so to speak, for, let's say, ratio. That might warrant putting him in niche, but he did get better, I think, in recent years, and can potentially be very strong in the future for certain situations thanks to having on-demand imprisonment, which we don't have anywhere else. Kafka is excellent. If we're being pedantic about it, she is a niche character in the most literal sense, in that she's only for damage over time, but being the frontrunner for damage over time teams, and with dot teams being insanely overpowered right now, she's someone you definitely want to prioritize, and she does carry a lot of pull value because she's absurdly strong now and will continue to get stronger with more dot characters. Her value can mature substantially as time goes on. Plus, in my opinion, Kafka Swan is presently in the top 3 best teams in the game, and most importantly,
she was the first person the Trailblazers set eyes on, and meaning Kafka must have been there for the Trailblazers' first words, the first step. No wonder so many players are calling her.
Silver Wolf is a niche character, very situational. She's an extremely useful support, especially on hypercarry teams and when fighting bosses. She has a few inconsistency problems which you can alleviate by going mono quantum or a maximum of 2 elements, and I think it's good to have her, but not top priority. I think people, myself included, overestimated the potential of her contributions, and despite being a fantastic support for Acheron can bypass weaknesses, so you don't really have to implant a lightning weakness on a target in the first place. Still a very valuable character. I think she will always maintain a baseline of pull value, but she doesn't have as high of a ceiling as we once thought. Marlin, bad. I'd rather have Peppy. Blade's going to be indecent. He's kind of like Cielo, where he's by no means a bad damage dealer, and with fairly high amounts of investment you can make him quite powerful. He's surprisingly tanky thanks to being an HP scaler, and is very self-contained and SP positive / efficient. You can use him as a backup DPS with other self-contained carries like Jingliu. In my humble opinion, he's very middle of the road. A solid unit, but nothing spectacular. Blade does have party limitations due to there just not being many HP to offense-oriented supports at the moment. Right now it's more attack focused, so if the meta changes to favor HP in the future, then Blade will become better. Next one's going to be Luca. He's niche, a dot support, that's about it. Luca, Sampo, Gui, etc. Basically just different flavors of ice cream for Kafka to pick and choose what she wants. Luca is mostly single target oriented, and he does have a damage amp on his ultimate, which is handy, but overall nothing spectacular, just physical dot damage. Next character is going to be Lunai Danheng. Excellent. He's high maintenance to all hell, but does humongous damage. I'm pretty sure if we go by standard damage, he has the second highest ceiling behind Acheron. Black Swan can go higher, but she's damage over time. While he is functional without her, Lunai Danheng needs Sparkle. Sparkle is so important to have if you want to maximize his potential. He's a harder character to play compared to more brain dead units, but well worth the effort, and he more than rewards you for the effort you put in. Next character is Fushuan. Fushuan's in top tier. Best tank in the game. Heals, buffs, covers, negates crowd control, self-sustain. Pull for her. There's nothing else to say. Just pull for her. Next character is going to be Lynx. Lynx is decent. An SP positive healer, which isn't that important anymore, I would say, but still pretty noteworthy to mention. And she has an AoE cleanse on her ultimate. Very nice to have. I would say though, in the end, she's a replacement to Natasha. A strict upgrade to her. So if you get Lynx, then you can start using her instead of Natasha. Gui Naifan, she's a niche character. She's the fire flavor ice cream for Kafka. She has a damage amp on her talent as opposed to Luca having one on ultimate, which makes her more consistent and less consistent at the same time. Luca has an activation condition of energy, while Gui Naifan has an activation condition on her talent. So let's pick your poison. I do think that Gui Naifan might be a little bit better because she has AoE damage over time, so she's more compatible with Kafka and Swan in that department, but once more, damage over time for the fire element. And with Gui Naifan, Hook's very niche possible application for fire damage over time is officially powercraft, so this character has no use anymore. Jingliu is going to be an excellent, basically Lunai Danheng that sacrifices DPS ceiling for more ease of use. She is one of the most consistent units in the game, and is an SP efficient / SP positive attacker. The best thing about her is that she doesn't really require any kind of specific lineup of supports. She can work with anybody, and is fully self-contained. Something to remember though is to not ultimate until after she activates her talent. That's a big problem with, I guess, auto battle, where if you have a so it activates ultimate when available, that kind of screws her over a bit, but you can always just set it to manual activation. Shui is going to be probably average. I say that because she can ignore weakness types and can break toughness gauges very fast, which means she does have a place and can be extremely strong, but she's a bigger investment black hole than Qingchui. I actually think that with Acheron she got power crept in terms of her niche of ignoring toughness gauges. She's similar to Qingchui overall though, where she can rival 5-star pressure if you're crazy enough to go through the conditions. I don't know, she gives me the same vibe as Yu Kong, where she has a very high ceiling, but it's either too hard, too impractical, too costly, or just too inefficient to get to that ceiling. Topaz is a niche character, follow-up attack booster, and a solid one. She's SP positive if you don't need to adjust your mark, so let's say you're fighting a single target, and follow-ups are getting more and more abundant, which does help her future value. However, in terms of follow-up, I think that she's now facing some pretty steep competition with the newest support. On the other hand, the two could work well together, so we'll have to wait and see. Argenti is excellent. He's overpowered as hell in pure fiction and can still be used competitively outside of it. He's a very respectable damage dealer even in smaller groups of enemies, and at the very least, prior to Boonhill, the best physical damage dealer in the game. Boonhill might change that, but the two have very contrasting mechanics. Hanya is going to be average. Her entire identity is SP generation, making her very SP positive, but Sparkle kind of took over that a bit. She can be usable, she offers a lot of different buffs, but apart from SP generation, she gets outclassed by quite a few supports. I don't think she would be anyone's first, second, third, fourth, or even fifth choice. Huohuo is going to be in top tier, best healer in the game. She can buff and battery on top of sustain. She has a passive cleanse. She's more SP demanding than Luocha, but not enough to kill her efficiency, and besides, her benefits more than justify those costs. And if I also may add another thing that bolsters her reputation, Tail. Tail's awesome, what can I say? Next character is going to be Runmei. Runmei is, with a big asterisk, I might say she's the best support in the game. She buffs the entire team just by breathing oxygen. She works for every team in the game. There's not a single composition she's incompatible with. That alone speaks volumes to her pull value. And it's not even like she's a jack of all trades, master of none. This woman has some of the highest damage boosting capabilities in the game. Min-maxing wise, not to the same extent as some other types, but she has a very high floor that is still higher than a lot of other support unit ceilings. That sort of underscores just how good she is. Some might say she's overrated in the sense that she doesn't really do anything special, but she's not good because she's special. She's good because she's reliable and consistent. Ratio is going to be an excellent. He's a free unit, PogChamp. He has the highest single target damage in the game and can use all manner of builds and supports, albeit he does prefer supports who can apply debuffs, but there's quite a few of them, so you won't be strapped for options on team building. Also, he's a follow-up attacker, and follow-up attacks are becoming much more prominent in this day and age, so he might get better as time goes on. Next character is Black Swan. Black Swan is going to be up here. Blast dot damage and AoE defense break. She can work for every combat scenario you can think of. I will also mention that even though 5-star Eidolons are kind of divisive among the community, Black Swan's E1's complete horse. She basically acquires Genshin's Virtus and Venerer, the VP Shred. That's insane to think about, especially on someone who can apply to the entire team and do a ton of damage on top of that. One more time, like I said in my opinion, Kafka Swan's top 3. She's usable outside of Kafka, but why the hell would you do that? If you have Black Swan, go for Kafka. If you have Kafka, go for Black Swan. Misha is average. Meh. That's all I can really say about him. In fact, even in my notes, I say meh. That's all I have for him. Yeah, he's a really forgettable character. He's not the worst character out there, but has anyone actually looked at him and went like, he's my soul main, I must main him? Has anyone unironically built this character and mained him? Because I really want to know. He's a product of late stage 4-star characters where, yeah, I can't think of really much else to say about him. It's just really meh. If I hurt any Misha main's feelings, I apologize for that, and maybe you can elucidate us a bit on what he excels at, but I can't really think of anything positive to say about him. He's just a really forgettable character. Sparkle, on the other hand, is a very memorable one and a top 3 support, tied with Runmei and someone else. She's the best support in the game if we go purely by the maximum potential of a character. She'll get even better as more units come out with high DPS ceilings that are restricted by SP consumption. This character basically breaks the game. Think about it, a maximum of 5 SP. She brings that to 7. Sparkle quite literally breaks the rules of the game. So of course she's gonna be top tier. If I were to actually like substantiate why she's the top 3 best support character, I think it's pretty self-evident. She gives a ton of damage to the entire team, she incentivizes teams to actually burn SP instead of conserve it, and she can speed up teammates just like Bronya. People say, oh, it's not as good because it's only 50% compared to 100%, but most of the time it actually is 100%. Like if you use Sparkle's skill on a teammate, they'll be next in line to act. It might as well be the same thing. It's not all the time, sometimes it isn't. It depends on how you format their speeds and whatnot, but applicably speaking, Sparkle's turn advance is identical to Bronya's. Then we have Acheron. Acheron is going to be excellent. This is a hot take, I'm sure. Some people might better hear. I believe no damage dealer deserves to be top tier because they're ultimately more replaceable than supports. Damage dealers are the end point of a team, whereas supports are the starting point of a team. Supports can be used for just more than one team, whereas damage dealers are the team. I know that somewhat contradicts what I said in my Genshin video where I included Alhaitham and Neuvillette in my top 10 best characters in Genshin, but I think for Starl, I don't really find her pull value to be on the same level as the characters in top tier. All the same, I will say that she's the best damage dealer in the game without question. Her scaling is through the roof, she breaks toughness regardless of vulnerabilities, and pretty much 1v9s the game, shout out to you League players out there. There's one con. At present, she's pretty expensive, both to gear up and party up. There was a lot of discourse about Acheron being not quite as free-to-play friendly as some other characters, and I'm partially inclined to agree with that. She's not unusable at base, but one of the biggest sources of her, humongous numbers is definitely her light cone, and to a lesser extent her Eidolons, especially the first two, because those make a huge difference in whether you can use other support characters with her, because if you use her at base, you need 2 other Nihility units with her, and that does restrict things quite a bit. With her second Eidolon, that brings it down to only 1 Nihility character, at which point that opens up the door for many more support units to be used with her, like Sparkle. So while I do stand by the notion that Acheron's DPS violates the Geneva Convention, because she's a DPS and because there's somewhat of a paywall attached to her, I don't think she's top tier. She's at like the cutoff point between top tier and excellent. But again, the gap between excellent and top tier is very small. Essentially, anyone in this group is a must pull if you have the wherewithal to do so. In the grand scheme of things, there's no major difference between these two categories. Oh, Aventurine.
Oh, Doctor, you're huge.
And you're also the only dude up in top tier, I just realized. He's basically Fu Xuan except he shields instead of cover tanking. Very similar buffs, and both of them are SP positive. He's a strict upgrade to Fu Xuan in follow-up teams, and a very slight downgrade everywhere else, but I think most of them would say they're basically neck and neck. Pick your poison. Gallagher, decent. Kinda like Lamesy is a strict upgrade to Natasha, is a solid healer who can do other stuff on this side. Good synergy with break-oriented teams, which I think will become more developed in the next patch with Boot Hill. But again, I can't really talk about that too much because this will be released before him. Imaginary Trailblazer. I'll put them in niche. Very strong break support, so again, like I said, we're kind of delving deeper into breaking, but they're strictly only for that department, so they're niche. And last but not least, Robin. Robin's going to be in top tier. The final member of the top 3, next to Runmei and Sparkle, the Holy Trinity, I guess you can call them. So Runmei, Sparkle, and Robin are like the 3 most important buffing supports to get. She's the best support in follow-up attack-oriented teams, but she can be used outside of them. She has the same kind of general profile of buffs that Sparkle and Runmei do. Number 1 support for speedrunning as well, because she can full team refresh with her ultimate. Last but not least, another reason why she's top tier is... Okay, that is the list. Oh my goodness, this video was so long. I thought it would be only like 30 minutes. I think it's going to be closer to 50 or an hour. But I hope that this was insightful to those who needed it and entertaining to those who wanted it. If you made it this far, I very much appreciate you for doing so. And if you haven't yet, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions on any of the characters or if you'd like to discuss placements and whatnot. Just to reiterate for one final time. Depending on memory turbulence, depending on scenarios and whatnot, you can make an argument that some characters are higher or lower than others. Please take this as a general reference point, and I cannot stress enough, cross-reference this with other sources of information. Never use just one person or one site or one platform or one source as your sole reference. You want to compare, different points of view, different opinions, what people prioritize, what people don't, and then come to your own conclusion on whether you think a character is good or bad. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, my voice is killing me, so I'll end things here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.